Hi there, Serial Trader here. Let's have a look at the end of the week action. And we'll start off with the wave chart here on SPX. And last week's high is held, and that came in at 26.7547. And actually on a weekly basis, let me just double check this here. Yeah, so on a weekly basis, we've actually closed lower than we did last week. So a slight down week. May not seem that way, but it actually was a negative week here on SPX. And going back to the daily, we may potentially have the first lower high in place. And whenever you get a key pivot, it's not so unusual that it needs to be thoroughly tested before you can establish, okay, that's truly going to hold now. The market's rejecting that level, and now we're going to switch directions here. So the first step is, if we're looking for a new downtrend to kick off here, the first step is a lower high. So currently we have that in place here at 26.7238, so just a few points below last week's high. So if this is going to hold, then we should, once we get out of this little range we've been in, we should be able to break down and start trending down in more impulsive fashion. And if we just look at the, so I have a couple scenarios here, a little bit of a shorter term wave count tweak. So there's a couple ways of counting it. So from our high last week on the Friday there, it was 26.7547. So we had what you could call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for 1. This actually looks like an okay A, B, C up for 2, as long as we do make that lower high, as wave 2 cannot retrace more than 100% of wave 1. So as long as that level holds, this is a viable interpretation. Another shorter term interpretation is this, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down like this, and then A, B, C, D, E for B, triangle B, right? And then a thrust up for C to finish off wave 2, again, as long as it holds below that 26.7547, which it did. So these are just the two shorter term bearish wave counts I can come up with the current short-term price action, and this is on the 15-minute time frame. So that's really the line in the sand to have a immediately kind of bearish trend take off, and that's to hold this level 26.7547. If that level cannot hold, then we have to entertain that we might be coming up to either test this 786 retracement of the December wave down there, or somewhere in that area, and get much farther past that, and technically, as long as we hold that high there at 2800 and change, it's still acceptable. But I'd really want to see it fail at or below the 786 to be a little more confident, and I'd rather see it fail currently at that 26.7547. So hopefully we have a pivot there, although certainly way too early to be really aggressive about it. Certainly a good stop level on a short-term basis to use if you want to try and do a top fishing play, 26.7547. So if we are on the right track, long-term and short-term, then we should resume down in a third wave here to significantly lower price levels and ultimately below that December low. But first, we need to see some signs that we've had a change in trend, and it's just not there yet. We're in that messy transition zone where it kind of stopped going up. It's not really going down much yet, just kind of sideways. So the market, basically has three main phases it can be in. It can be in an uptrend, it can be in a downtrend, or it can be in a sideways or non-trending environment. So there might have to be a little bit of a non-trending sideways environment, or a very slightly bullish environment before we can really get going there. But we'll see next week. Ideally next week resolves this and we start breaking, but time will tell. All right, now we'll go to the Thinkorswim candlestick chart. So on a daily candlestick perspective, we're still above the T line, and we're still using that T line as support. So until we see a real sell signal to close below the T line, there's no real signals as far as this goes. Obviously, with that short-term Elliott, I'm trying to really dial in, the earliest possible sign of bearish change, but it'll take a little more confirmation, even just on this daily candlestick chart, to see that. Now there is the top of this channel. We could go up, and that's probably close to that 786 retracement level. And then there's that 200-day moving average, which we certainly had plenty of interaction with late last year. So we'll have to see. Nothing really today. A little bit of an upper shadow rejecting, intraday higher prices, but nothing substantial as far as signals on this, candlestick chart. Look at the weekly since we closed the week. And, the weekly looks like it's finding support on the weekly T-line. Possibly a weekly bullish hammer candlestick, but again, on a weekly basis, it's actually down for the week, and we didn't violate last week's high. So, I mean, for something to start going down, first it has to stop going up, maybe go sideways, and then start going down again. So it might sound simple, but very, very rarely do you just get a complete U-turn just immediately, a change in trend. That's not typical. So we might have some more painful, slow action before we actually get some real moves going here. All right, so that's the weekly. We'll go to the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And on the Dow here, possibly a bearish, inverted bearish hammer reversal candlestick. Now, interestingly enough, the Dow actually did take out last week's high. And I think even on a closing basis, had a slightly positive close for the week. So that's a little divergence there from SPX. I think it's also a divergence from the NASDAQ, but we'll look at that shortly. That's another thing, too. So sometimes when you're, at a point where the trend is going to change, you get a divergence on the indices. So you might have, a new extreme in one of the indices, or two of the indices, but, not confirming in the other or the other two. And that can sometimes be a sign that, okay, something's about to shift. Usually the indices kind of confirm each other's moves. So when you have that non-confirmation, along with the context of where we are, that can be another, little clue that, okay, something's potentially changing soon. So interesting. Dow, at least for the week, was more bullish than the other two. But again, on this daily candlestick, possible early sell signal, inverted bearish hammer. But again, no confirmation. You got to at least start getting below that T-line. Break some short-term support levels to try and get confident. And the Dow is actually pretty close to its 200-day moving average. It's closer than the other two. So we'll have to see if that has to be tested or not. And on the weekly, possibly a doji on the weekly. So that's another potential, reversal signal. A doji after such a, strong up move there on the weekly. Possibly rejecting off the 50-week simple moving average. We'll have to see, though. Okay, so that's the Dow as it stands. Go take a look at the NASDAQ composite. And let's have a look here. So from a candlestick perspective, anything notable? Not really. This isn't a signal of any type that I'm aware of. Oh, another thing. So we did have a gap up today, not just on the NASDAQ, but on the others as well. So the fact that we're this extended up from such a, depressed low down here, and now we've had a gap up, but we failed to make a new high off the gap up. This could be interesting if we come down and just close the gap and continue, or if we close the gap and then just keep going. And you can see the NASDAQ here failed to make a new, let's see here. I think it actually did make a new closing high for the week, but intraday, it did not take out the intraday high of last week. So a slightly lower high on the NASDAQ as well. So again, SPX and the NASDAQ have a lower high in place. The Dow does not. And we are right here just on the edge of this channel, again on that NASDAQ. So that's still an interesting place to get a pivot. Okay, anything on the weekly here on the NASDAQ to mention? Let's see. So a possible bullish hammer on the weekly, finding some support on that weekly T-line. but again, failing to make a new high above last week's high. So seems bullish, but we actually made no progress on a weekly basis here, or almost no progress. And the SPX did not make any progress on a closing or intra-week basis. All right, so we'll have to watch this carefully. I do like that gap. That's going to be interesting. I mean, how many gaps do you see get filled on these charts? All of them, essentially. So you know you're going to come back down, but what do we do once we come back down and close that gap? Is that it, or do we continue? That's kind of the story next week, I think. Okay, we'll go with the VIX. And the VIX, after bursting out of the gate, showing some life, we've come right back down, and we've set a slightly higher low, ever so slightly. So last week's low on the VIX was 17.17. Today's low was 17.31, and we closed at 17.42. So possibly our first little move up, and our deep retracement, and the first higher low, which would coincide with the first lower high on at least the NASDAQ and the S&P. So we'll have to see. Again, next week is just going to continue telling the story, right? Okay, now speaking of the VIX complex, we'll look at the VIX tool. And we're not really on any buy or sell signal at this point. After initially looking pretty promising here, VIX roaring out of the gates along with VIX, getting above that moving average. We started getting below that blue moving average on SPX, but really just kind of teased with it, and now we're above it again. So we're not really on a buy signal or a sell signal here. So right now we're just waiting. This is essentially just on a neutral signal at this point. But maybe next week we will get our signal if we can start actually doing some downside follow through there. Okay, well, that's probably good for this video. I'll check in again next week. I haven't made any changes to those positions from the last video I mentioned and previous videos as well. And it can be very hard on your patience when you just you're excited about catching a big wave and excited about catching that big turn. But usually early on in these turns, it can be very boring and kind of just fake you out a few times, and then finally it starts going, and that's really the easy time to get in once she starts flowing. Once you get the waterfall moves where you're just down, 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 down every day, or up, up, up every day, depending. So yeah, we'll have to see how this develops, but just stay patient for now. There will be some sort of significant move coming, but we just gotta wait. All right, Serial Trader signing off.